In the lands between, grace once guided the Tarnished on the path to become Elden Lord. Now it calls to us to shape that world with our own hands. Welcome, maidenless traveler. Today we forge a piece of the Elden Ring universe, a diorama worthy of the Erdtree shadow, with crumbling ruins, spectral light, and the echoes of the Tibia mariner's toll. We'll bring the shattered legacy of the Golden Order to your tabletop. I didn't really have a good plan going into this. I just grabbed a piece of foam board insulation and a couple of miniatures that I thought I could incorporate into this, and I just started cutting pieces out of the foam board. You saw me earlier taking a black Sharpie and just drawing on some rough outlines of where I wanted a water feature to go. And then I took a utility blade here, and you can just see me carving out a very shallow area where I want to put the water. I didn't go too deep because I didn't want to use too much resin. And since it was going to be mixed with a little bit of acrylic paint and to tint the water, it didn't need to be deep at all to give the effect of it being deep. After I was done carving out that spot, you can see I decided to take some plaster of Paris and cover the whole board with that. I quickly realized that I had put way too much on, so you can see me scooping some of that off and putting it back in the container. It takes very little of this to cover the entire surface here. Because I don't like to waste a lot of materials here, I brought out some rock molds I had made out of some silicone earlier in the week, and I filled them with plaster of Paris. I'd usually either go on to use just a couple of these rocks, and the rest of them I just ended up putting in a bag for a later project. After letting the rocks set in the molds, I removed them. Took about, I think I left it for probably 6 or 7 hours. And then I just started playing around with the placement of a couple of these rocks. I ended up changing this a bunch of different times before I was happy with it. Originally I was going to put one of the miniatures standing on the rocks, but you'll find later that I didn't end up doing that at all. Once I picked out the rocks I wanted to use, I covered the entire base and the rocks with a matte Mod Podge mixed with black acrylic paint, and that's just to help seal up all of that plaster of Paris so it doesn't absorb any of the paint or epoxy resin that I ended up using for the rest of it. Originally I thought I could just take this Mod Podge and glue the rocks down with it, but I later had to come back and add some glue to the bottom of those rocks to get them to stick. They just did not stick with that thin coat of Mod Podge. Once that was all dry, I took some Vallejo Diorama thick mud. It's like a sort of a textured acrylic paint of some kind. It dries to make a mud look and texture, and I covered the area where the swamp was going to go, and then a bit up on the shore there. Later I'll come back and I'll end up covering all of the ground with this, so you could do that earlier on rather than doing it later if you wanted to and get it all out of the way at once, because it does take a little bit of time to dry. Next up, I wanted to make it look like there was some longer dead grass that was growing in the swamp water itself. So I took some of this Woodland Scenics field grass. I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but it's pretty long. It's maybe 2.5 or 3 inches in length. And I cut that in half in little clumps, and then I glued it down just off the shore of the swamp area there. I think I put 4 or 5 clumps in various spots. You want to sort of space it out a bit to make it look natural, and you don't really want there to be a pattern to it or anything like that. You could also use other colors of grasses. You could put some like taller green grass in here and make it look kind of like bulrushes. Anything really would work. It's just to have some visual appeal and break up the water a bit. Then I use some coarse turf and fine turf mix, and you can see me gluing it a little bit along the edge of the swamp there. And what I was using here is quite short, and it's used to build a transition layer between the mud and then what would be I think we ended up using 2mm static grass for the rest of the diorama here. Then I took a couple larger clumps and put it along the shore, like little bushes or shrubs there. Once that was done, I mixed some UV resin with some Vallejo Environment slimy grime. It's a slimy dark grime, I think it is. And I spread it out along the where I was going to put all the rest of the water later. I did this to an attempt to try to make sure that the epoxy resin I put on later wouldn't eat away at the foam. I'm not sure. I haven't used that much epoxy resin before, so that's what I did. Just note, mixing UV resin with anything like this, it was going to impact how well it takes to cure under the UV light. So after that was all cured, I moved on to painting the boat. I used a Vallejo chestnut brown, followed by an Agrax earth shade wash, just to get it to seep into all the cracks and crevices of the boat, and give the paint a little bit more depth. When using washes like Agrax Earthshade, I don't really pay too much attention to how much is going on. You can be pretty liberal with it. Once that was done, I took a AK pastel purple and mixed it with a little bit of white ink, and I gave the boat a light dusting of that, because in the game the boat is kind of like a ghostly purple color, and that's the best I could come up with. Then I just took some UV resin and started adding the glass into the lantern there, and I used a very small LED light. Once that was done, I ended up pouring the rest of the epoxy resin in there while the boat was sitting in the water, and it fused the boat to the diorama. So if you mess that up, then the rest of it's going to get messed up. So be careful with your placement and make sure it's weighted down well enough. The wires are also running through the base there. And then you see me covering the rest of the base with some more of that Vallejo thick mud texture. And that's just so that when we use the static grass, if any of it doesn't get covered, you're not seeing that black base underneath. Because this used quite a bit of the mud texture paste, if that's what you want to call it, if I did it over again, I probably would have just airbrushed different shades of brown paint instead, because most of it got covered up with the grass anyway. And after that was done, I used some Liquitex gloss gel medium to make some ripples in the water here. I haven't done this before. I'm not exactly sure how it was going to turn out. I wasn't 100% satisfied with it, but it was definitely a learning experience. I didn't really go with I guess the direction that the ripple should have went in, and so I ended up going back with this old brush and just sort of stippling it all over the surface of the water, just to create some surface texture, so it wasn't that glossy flatness. While I wait for that to dry, I just took some watered down PVA glue and started using a dropper and put it all over the base. This is where I'm going to start laying down the first layer of 2mm static grass, and that's just a mixture of a couple different shades of static grass that I'm going to use. But before I lay that on there, I took some clump foliage from Woodland Scenics and placed it underneath the rock and around the edges a little bit. And this is just to make a few more shrubs. And then I took some Woodland Scenics, it's like a flowering powder stuff, and I used a red one, and that makes it look like there's little berries or little flowers on the shrubbery, just to give it a bit more color. And after that, I just started adding the static grass here. Just a pro tip or a little fun fact about static grass applicators: if you're using one and you have it turned on, you should not stick your finger on the screen of the static grass applicator. I did that here, and I received a shock and dropped static grass all over the floor. So, best just to keep your fingers off that screen, because it'll give you a shock. In between the layers of static grass, I just took some more of that watered down PVA glue and I dropped it all over the surface. It dries clear so you can't see it, and it helps keep all that grass in place, especially around the shrubs and stuff like that. You want to really get them glued onto the surface so when you move it around, things don't fall off on you. After that, you could see me working on some of the little gravestones here. I just 3D printed these. I did a coat of black paint and some dry brushing with a couple different shades of gray, and then I came in with some dirty down moss and started dabbing that around the base and anywhere where moss might be growing on these old headstones. And once the paint dried on those, which only took a couple of seconds, I just started playing around with the placement there, and then I took some super glue and added it to the bottom of them once I was happy where they were going to go, and just stuck them down into the grass. Here I just took a couple of shades of gray. I think it was a neutral gray and a stone gray, and I dry brushed the rocks with those two colors. And then I applied a black wash over all the rocks. That's just sort of a bit of a unifying wash to bring those colors together and dull down the super highlights there. And then after that was dry, I just added a couple other really quick highlights on the highest areas of the rocks using Vallejo deck tan, but you could use any kind of like ivory or sand or white. I just wouldn't use a pure white color. Once that was done, I took some smaller bits and pieces of rock that I'd smashed up and stuck it around the edges just so there wasn't that sharp edge between the rocks and the base of the diorama, and took some dry pigments and mixed them up and just put them in and around the rocks just to give it a bit more of that rock look. And then one more quick dry brush just to hit those highlights where it had been dulled down a bit by the dry pigments. After the dry brushing was all done, I still wasn't super happy with the rocks, so I came back in with a couple other dry pigments and just started placing those around the rocks just to dull it down a bit more. Sometimes you have to go back and forth a little bit to get things to look right. And then I just took some of those dry pigments and put them around the rest of the base there just to use them up in and around where the dirt areas were. Moving on to painting the Tibia Mariner skeleton ghost thing. I started out with the an ivory for the bone colors. And after that was done, I started using some skeleton horde contrast paint on all the bones just to dull that down a bit, like I do for all of the skeleton and bone work that I've done in previous videos. I checked the reference photo quite a few times while I was trying to match up some of these purples. I knew I wasn't going to get it exact, but that's not really important. I was just trying to get the light purples light and the dark purples dark, and the medium ones in between. I ended up using Vallejo Lustful Purple, Vallejo, I think it was Alien Purple, and AK Pastel Purple mixed together in just to make part of the cloth or lace a lighter color than the other part. Now's a good time to tell you a bit about the background music that I've used for this video. It all came from Bits and Hits, which I'll link to in the description of the video. And they make a bunch of fantasy lo-fi music, and they're definitely worth checking out. You can also use their music in your videos as long as you credit them, which is a small price to pay for using some quality background music. The miniatures that I used in this video, so the Tibia Mariner and the other guy there, they were released through the Real Steon Patreon that I subscribe to every month, pay for with my own money. Nothing is provided to me free of charge. They release a handful of like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Grimdark themed miniatures each month for less than the price of a cup of coffee a day. So well worth it if you enjoy painting miniatures and you like those kinds of universes. After those purples were done, I took a couple shades of gold, the Proacryl Rich Gold and Proacryl Bronze, and started adding in some of those metal features, so around all the gold bracelets all the way up the arm. And she also had some coins that were hanging off the lace veil there. Is it a veil? I don't know. So that's what I was doing there with the metallic colors. As I said before, if you've had a sort of a bad experience with metallics in the past, but haven't tried some of these Proacryl ones, I would highly recommend them. They go on really nice, and they don't have really large pigments in them, so they work really well with small scales as well as larger scale items. Moving on to this large horn or paddle. I think it's both. I think they use it for a horn and a paddle. I covered that whole thing with Proacryl Bronze, and then hit all the highlights with a Citadel Layer Liberator Gold, which is just a bit brighter than the bronze, but it does make it look like it catches the light. So that's I could have used any other lighter gold there. After that was done, I moved on to making this little tree. I used some dried roots from an old pine tree that I had pulled out of the ground last spring and just dried in a bag over the winter. And then I used some seafoam trees and started drilling little holes into it and placing these little branches of seafoam into the pine tree roots here to make the more delicate parts of the tree, so the leaves and the very small branches. This took a bit of time, a little bit more time than I thought it was going to. I found too that getting some of the really small pieces of seafoam to stick with super glue were a bit of a challenge, because I wanted to fix them firmly into the tree, so I used some pretty small drill bits to get the hole small enough without splitting the wood, and get them stuck in there. For anyone watching who wants to build smaller trees, you don't have to buy things like seafoam trees. You can use smaller pieces of foliage and stuff that you can find outside. I found lots of different things to use in the past. This is the first time I've actually ever used the seafoam, and it can be a bit expensive for what it is. But I also found that there wasn't anything that quite met the needs or the looks of the really small branches. So it works really well. You don't need a lot of it. A little bit, it goes a long way. So I think it's worth picking up a pack just to try it out sometime if you can. Once that was done, I took it into the airbrush booth here, and I just sprayed the whole thing with a couple different shades of gray, because I wanted the trunk to look gray. And then I took some of this Woodland Scenics fall foliage and put it in a container, and I sprayed the whole tree with Super 77. It's a spray adhesive. Any spray adhesive would probably do. And then I just sort of covered the whole thing with that foliage. And once that was done and dry, I drilled a small hole in the base with my knife, and I jammed it all in there. After that was done, I took some of that watered down PVA glue and carefully dropped it all over the foliage there, because if you don't do that, then it's really a bit too delicate, so when you move it around or touch it, the pieces will end up falling off. So you're better off just gluing it all down into place. Don't worry about dripping everywhere else. It will it'll dry clear and you won't see it. And with that, we are close to finishing up the diorama here. A frozen moment from the lands between, captured in miniature. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope this build stirred a bit of that tarnished spirit within you, the same one that urges us to rise, create, and face the unknown, even when the path is lost to fog. Whether it's a crumbling cliffside near Stormvale Castle, a forgotten catacomb guarded by skeletal remains, or even the quiet waters where the Tibia mariner roams, there's a whole world waiting to be shaped by your hands. If this inspired you to begin your own craft, no matter how small, know that every Erdtree started as a seed. So keep building. May your glue dry faster than your runes are lost. Until next time, take care, and may the grace guide you.